The wind howled across the barren plains of West Texas, carrying with it the sting of sand and the promise of another merciless night. Sarah McKenna stood at the window of her weathered cabin, watching the sun bleed crimson across the horizon. The wooden shutters rattled against their frames, a lonely percussion that had become the soundtrack of her solitary existence. It had been 3 years since Tom died. 3 years since that fateful afternoon when Sheriff Bradshaw brought her husband's body back from town, claiming he'd drawn first in a dispute over cattle prices. Sarah never believed it. Tom had been many things: stubborn, prideful, quick to anger, but he wasn't foolish enough to challenge the sheriff's men. Yet what could a widow do against the word of the law? She turned from the window, her calloused hands smoothing down her faded calico dress. The cabin felt smaller each passing day, its log walls pressing in like the weight of judgment from the townsfolk who whispered behind her back. The Widow McKenna, they called her, as if her name had died with Tom. Some crossed themselves when she passed. Others muttered about bad luck following her like a shadow. The cattle needed tending. Sarah pulled on Tom's old coat, too big for her frame but warm against the desert cold, and stepped outside. The small herd she'd managed to keep alive huddled together near the water trough, their eyes reflecting the dying light. She counted them, as she did every evening. 12 head, enough to survive another month if she could get them to market. Thunder rumbled in the distance, though no clouds marked the sky. Sarah frowned. Dry thunder meant dust storms, and dust storms meant trouble. She hurried to secure the barn doors and check the water barrels. The last storm had lasted 2 days, coating everything in a fine layer of grit that took weeks to clean. As she worked, her mind wandered to the letter hidden beneath her mattress, an offer from her sister in St. Louis to come live with them. This is no life for a young woman. Martha had written, "Leave that God-forsaken place and come home." But this was home. Every plank Tom had nailed, every fence post they'd driven together into the unforgiving earth. How could she abandon it all? The storm hit faster than expected. One moment the air was still, the next a wall of dust and debris slammed into the homestead. Sarah barely made it back to the cabin, her eyes stinging, lungs burning from the thick air. She barred the door and lit the oil lamp, its weak flame casting dancing shadows on the walls. The storm raged for hours. Sarah sat at her small table, mending a torn shirt by lamplight, trying to ignore the sand seeping through every crack and crevice. The walls groaned under the assault, and somewhere outside, she heard the crash of something breaking, probably the chicken coop again. It was near midnight when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A heavy thud against her door, followed by what might have been a groan. Sarah froze, needles suspended in midair. Raiders sometimes used storms as cover, knowing folks would be hunkered down and blind. Another thud. Definitely not the wind. Sarah set down her sewing and reached for Tom's Winchester mounted above the fireplace. Her hands trembled as she checked the chamber. Loaded. She'd made sure of that every night since becoming a widow. The lamp flickered, throwing her shadow large against the wall as she approached the door. "Who's there?" she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. No answer came, only the howling wind. She waited, rifle raised, heart pounding. The storm was beginning to die, its fury spent. Through the gap beneath the door, she saw something dark spreading across the threshold. Blood. Common sense told her to wait until morning, to let whoever or whatever was out there deal with their own troubles. But Tom's voice echoed in her memory. "We might be far from church, Sarah girl, but that don't mean we abandon Christian charity." Slowly, she unbarred the door, rifle at the ready. The wind grabbed it immediately, slamming it against the wall. There, collapsed on her porch, was a man. His dark coat was torn, sand-caked blood matting his hair. A holster hung empty at his hip. Sarah knelt cautiously, rifle still trained on him. In the lamplight spilling from inside, she could make out a strong jaw stubbled with several days' growth, sun-weathered skin, and hands scarred from rope work. A cowboy. from the look of him. His breathing was shallow but steady. She was about to check his pockets for identification when the dying wind cleared enough moonlight to illuminate his face fully. Sarah's blood ran cold. She knew that face, had seen it on the wanted posters nailed to the post office wall in town. Jake Sullivan, wanted for cattle rustling and robbery. $500, dead or alive. Her first instinct was to back away, to bar the door and let the desert claim him. But the blood pooling beneath him was real, and despite everything, she couldn't watch a man die on her doorstep. Not again. With effort, she managed to drag him inside, leaving a dark trail across her clean floor. He was heavier than he looked, solid muscle beneath the trail-worn clothes. She deposited him near the fireplace and stood back, rifle ready, considering her options. The smart thing would be to ride for town at first light, bring back the sheriff. $500 could keep her and the cattle fed through winter. But something held her back. Maybe it was the way Sheriff Bradshaw's eyes had been too steady when he told her about Tom. Or maybe it was just foolish woman's sympathy. Sullivan stirred, eyelids fluttering. His hand moved instinctively toward his empty holster, then stilled. Eyes the color of winter sky opened, focusing slowly on her, and the rifle barrel pointed at his chest. "Well," he said, voice rough as sandpaper, "I reckon this ain't heaven." "No," Sarah replied, surprised by her own steadiness. "And it ain't hell either, though you might wish it was." He tried to sit up, grimaced, and thought better of it. "You planning to shoot me, ma'am?" "Haven't decided yet." A ghost of a smile crossed his cracked lips. "Fair enough." Sarah kept the rifle trained on him as she backed toward the kitchen, grabbing rope from the cupboard. Tom had taught her knots, how to secure a calf, how to tie off a pack. She'd never thought she'd use them on a man. "I need to bind your wound," she said. "But first, you're going to let me tie you up. Try anything, and I'll put a bullet in you myself." Sullivan watched her with those unnervingly calm eyes. "Yes, ma'am." She worked quickly, efficiently, binding his hands and feet with knots that would hold but not cut off circulation. He didn't resist, though she could feel the strength in his arms. The potential for violence held in check. When she was satisfied, he couldn't break free easily. She examined the wound, a deep gash along his ribs, probably from a knife rather than a bullet. "This needs cleaning," she said, more to herself than to him. "I'd be obliged," he answered, "though I understand if you'd rather let it fester." Sarah fetched water and clean cloth, her movements automatic. How many times had she done this for Tom after a hard day breaking horses? But this was different. This was a criminal, a man who lived outside the law. As she cleaned the wound, he studied her. "You're the widow McKenna." It wasn't a question. Sarah's hands stilled for a moment before continuing their work. "And you're Jake Sullivan." "So they say." Are they wrong? He was quiet for a long moment. "About the name? No, ma'am. About the rest?" "Well, that's a longer story." Sarah tied off the bandage with perhaps more force than necessary. "Save it for the sheriff." She stood, wiping her bloody hands on her apron. In the lamplight, Sullivan looked younger than his wanted poster suggested. Though his eyes held the weight of hard years, the storm had finally died completely, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. "You fixing to turn me in come morning?" he asked. Sarah retrieved her rifle, checking the chamber again, though she knew it was still loaded. "What I'm fixing to do is keep you here until I decide what's right. Could be I turn you in. Could be I just shoot you myself and save the trouble. And could be you listen to what I have to say. I don't bargain with outlaws. Mr. Sullivan?" "No," he said, settling back against the wall with a slight wince. "I don't suppose you do. But you might want to ask yourself why a wanted man would ride through a dust storm to collapse on the widow's doorstep when Sheriff Bradshaw's been so keen on finding him." Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger. "Don't you dare speak his name in my house." Sullivan's eyes sharpened, reading something in her reaction. "Interesting. Most folks speak of the good sheriff with respect, or fear, but not you. Get some sleep," Sarah said curtly. "You'll need your strength for the ride to town tomorrow. She dragged a chair to face him, rifle across her lap. Outside, the desert began to settle. Small sounds of life returning. A coyote's distant howl. The rustle of tumbleweeds against the porch. Inside, the lamp burned low, casting long shadows between captor and captive. "Ma'am?" Sullivan's voice was growing drowsy, whether from blood loss or exhaustion. "Thank you for not leaving me to die out there." Sarah didn't answer. She sat in Tom's chair, wearing Tom's coat, holding Tom's rifle, and watched over the outlaw who'd brought danger to her door. Through the window, stars began to appear as the dust settled, cold and distant as the truth. "You're my prisoner," she whispered, more to convince herself than to inform him. The words felt strange on her tongue, heavy with a meaning she couldn't quite grasp. Sullivan's eyes were closed now, his breathing deep and even, but she could have sworn she saw him smile. The abandoned barn stood 50 yards from the main house, its weathered board silver in the pre-dawn light. Sarah had cleared it out months ago, thinking to sell the lumber, but now it would serve a different purpose. She prodded Sullivan awake with the rifle barrel, keeping her distance. "Get up," she commanded. "We're moving." He stirred slowly, testing his bonds. The rope held firm. His eyes, clearer now than they'd been the night before, assessed her with an intelligence that made her grip the rifle tighter. "The barn?" he guessed, glancing toward the window. Less talking, more walking. She helped him to his feet, careful to maintain distance between them. He was taller than she'd realized, broader through the shoulders, even wounded and bound. There was something dangerous about him, not just the obvious threat of violence, but something deeper, more unsettling. The walk to the barn was tense. Dawn painted the desert in shades of rose and gold, beautiful and merciless. Sarah kept the rifle trained on his back, though she wondered if she could actually pull the trigger if he ran. Tom would have shot first and asked questions later, but she wasn't Tom. The barn's interior was dim and musty, hay dust dancing in the shafts of light that leaked through the boards. An old horse stall in the corner would do. Sarah gestured him inside with the rifle. "Sit," she ordered. Sullivan lowered himself carefully onto the hay-strewn floor, favoring his wounded side. Sarah produced more rope from a nail on the wall and secured him to the thick corner post. When she was satisfied he couldn't escape, she stepped back, finally allowing herself to breathe. "Sheriff Bradshaw will be pleased," Sullivan said, his voice carrying an edge she couldn't quite identify. "He's been looking for me for months. Then he'll be glad when I bring you in." "Will he now?" Sullivan shifted, trying to find a comfortable position against the post. "Tell me, Mrs. McKenna, what did the good sheriff tell you about your husband's death?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "That's none of your concern." "Maybe not, but I was there that day." The words hit her like a physical blow. She took an involuntary step forward, rifle rising. "You're lying." "Am I?" His eyes never left hers. "September 15th, 3 years back. Your husband came to town to sell cattle to Ben Morrison. Had words with the sheriff about missing head from his count. Said he knew someone was skimming off the top of every sale, taking a cut that didn't belong to them." Sarah's hands trembled. Tom had been angry that morning. She remembered, had kissed her goodbye with unusual fervor, promising to get to the bottom of the missing cattle. She'd never seen him alive again. "The sheriff said Tom drew first," she whispered. Sullivan laughed, a bitter sound. "Tom McKenna never drew that gun. He was walking out of Morrison's when they shot him. In the back. I saw it from the saloon across the street. No." But even as she denied it, something cold settled in her stomach. The wound. She'd seen the wound when they brought Tom home. She'd washed his body for burial, had wondered. "Why should I believe you?" she asked, voice harder now. "You're a thief and a liar." "A thief? Maybe," Sullivan conceded. "But ask yourself this. Why would I lie? What could I possibly gain from telling you this story while I'm trussed up like a Christmas turkey in your barn?" Sarah sank onto an overturned bucket, suddenly exhausted. The rifle rested across her knees, still pointed in his general direction but without the same conviction. Outside, she could hear her cattle lowing, reminding her of the morning chores that waited. "Say I believe you," she said slowly. "Say Tom was murdered. What's that to you?" Sullivan was quiet for a moment, studying her. "Because the cattle they say I stole, they were being sold through the same operation that killed your husband. Sheriff Bradshaw has been running a rustling ring for years, taking cuts from legitimate sales and stealing what he couldn't skim. I got too close to proving it." "So you are a rustler." "I was hired by the Cattlemen's Association to investigate the losses. Was working undercover when Bradshaw figured out who I was. He framed me for the very crimes I was investigating." Sarah stood abruptly. It was too much, too convenient. This man appeared on her doorstep and suddenly had answers to all her questions. "I need to think. Take your time," Sullivan said. "Though I'd appreciate some water when you get a chance. And maybe something to eat. Hard to escape on an empty stomach." "Despite everything." Sarah almost smiled at that. "I'll consider it." She left him there, making sure to bar the barn door from the outside. The morning sun was climbing higher, promising another scorching day. Her cattle needed tending. Chickens needed feeding, assuming any had survived the storm. Life didn't stop for outlaws and accusations. As she worked, her mind churned over Sullivan's words. The wound in Tom's back. The way Sheriff Bradshaw's eyes had never quite met hers when he explained what happened. The missing cattle that Tom had been so angry about. By noon, she'd made a decision. She prepared a simple meal, beans, cornbread, water, and returned to the barn. Sullivan was where she'd left him, though she noticed he'd tested the ropes. "Smart man." "Hungry?" she asked. "Obliged, ma'am." She had to untie one hand so he could eat. She sat across from him, rifle ready, watching as he ate with careful efficiency. His manners were better than she'd expected from an outlaw. "Where are you from?" she found herself asking. "Originally, Virginia. My family had a small farm before the war. After," he shrugged, "drifted west like everyone else looking for a new start. And became a cattle thief. Became a Pinkerton man, actually, then went independent, hiring out to ranchers' associations. Not as glamorous, but it paid better than farming." Sarah digested this. "You have proof of what you're saying?" "Had papers, had a badge, had a contact in Austin who could verify everything. But that was before Bradshaw's men jumped me 2 days ago. They took everything, left me for dead." He gestured to his wounded side. "Almost succeeded, too." "Why come here?" Sullivan set down the empty plate. "Honestly, I wasn't aiming for anywhere in particular. Just riding, trying to stay ahead of them. When the storm hit, I was already half dead. Your light was the only one I could see. Lucky me. Maybe, or maybe fate has a sense of humor." They sat in silence for a moment. Through the gaps in the barn walls, Sarah could see dust rising on the horizon. Riders, still far off but coming this way. Sullivan saw it too. Company coming. Sarah's stomach tightened. It could be anyone. Neighbors checking on her after the storm. Travelers passing through. Or it could be... "If that's Bradshaw," Sullivan said quietly, "he won't just take me. He'll want to know what I told you. And he won't be gentle about asking. You don't know that." "Don't I? Your husband asked too many questions. Look what happened to him." Sarah stood, moving to peer through a crack in the wall. 3 riders, still too far to make out clearly. But something about the way they rode, purposeful and direct. "There's a root cellar," she said suddenly. "Under the house. If I untie you, you'd be harboring a fugitive. That's a hanging offense. So is murdering innocent men, but that doesn't seem to stop some people." Sullivan studied her. "Why would you risk it? You don't know me. You don't know if anything I've said is true." Sarah turned from the wall to face him. In the dim light of the barn, with dust motes swirling between them, she felt something shift. "Because I've spent 3 years wondering why Tom died. 3 years being told to accept it and move on. And you're the first person who suggested what I always suspected, that the official story was a lie. That's not enough reason to risk your life. Isn't it? Sarah moved to untie his bonds, working quickly. My life ended when Tom died. All I've been doing since is existing. If there's even a chance you're telling the truth. The ropes fell away. Sullivan stood slowly, rubbing his wrists. For a moment, they faced each other in the dim barn, captor and prisoner no longer sure of their roles. I could overpower you, he said quietly. Take your gun, your horse, disappear. You could, Sarah agreed, not stepping back. Will you? The sound of horses was getting closer. Sullivan glanced toward the door, then back at her. No, ma'am, I don't believe I will. Then we'd better move. That cellar won't hide itself. They slipped out the back of the barn, keeping low. Sarah's heart pounded as they crossed the open ground to the house. Every second she expected to hear a shout, a gunshot. But they made it inside just as the riders crested the nearest rise. The root cellar entrance was hidden beneath a worn rug in the kitchen. Sarah hauled it open, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. Get in, she urged. Sullivan hesitated. If they search the house, I'll handle it. Go! He descended quickly, and she dropped the door, pulling the rug back into place. Through the window, she could see the riders approaching. 3 men, and yes, the one in front with the glinting badge was Sheriff Bradshaw. Sarah took a deep breath, smoothed her hair, and walked out onto the porch to meet them, Tom's rifle casual in her hands. Sheriff, she called out, injecting what she hoped was the right amount of surprise into her voice. What brings you all the way out here? Bradshaw touched his hat brim. He was a big man, running to fat now but still powerful. His eyes were cold as river stones. Mrs. McKenna, we're tracking a dangerous fugitive. Man might have passed this way during the storm. The storm was something fierce. Sarah agreed. But I haven't seen anyone. Been locked up tight since yesterday afternoon. One of the deputies, a weasel-faced man she recognized as Carl Dixon, spoke up. We ought to search the property. Sheriff, just to be sure. Bradshaw held up a hand, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. Now, Carl, I'm sure Mrs. McKenna would tell us if she'd seen anything unusual. Wouldn't you, ma'am? There was weight in that question, a threat barely concealed. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Of course, Sheriff, though I'd appreciate knowing who you're looking for, a woman alone needs to be careful. Jake Sullivan, Bradshaw said, watching her reaction. Cattle thief, killer, escaped custody 2 days ago after murdering one of my deputies. Sarah let surprise show on her face. My goodness, and you think he came this way? Trail led in this direction before the storm wiped it out. Bradshaw shifted in his saddle. Mind if we water our horses? Maybe have a look around, just to be thorough. Sarah's mind raced. Of course, the well's around back, though I should mention, she added, as if just remembering. I thought I heard riders passing by early this morning, heading north toward the Canyonlands. Could have been anyone, I suppose. Bradshaw's eyes sharpened. North, you say? Could have been the wind playing tricks, but it sounded like horses moving fast. The sheriff exchanged glances with his men. The Canyonlands were a maze of arroyos and hidden valleys, a perfect place for a fugitive to lose himself, or for a posse to waste days searching. We'll water the horses, Bradshaw decided. Then move on. But ma'am, he leaned forward in his saddle, if Sullivan does show up here, you be careful. He's already killed one lawman. Wouldn't hesitate to harm a woman, especially one all alone out here. I'll keep my rifle handy, Sarah promised. The next 20 minutes were the longest of her life. The deputies watered their horses and made a cursory search of the barn, but Bradshaw seemed eager to pursue the false lead north. Sarah stood on her porch, rifle in hand, watching until they were dust on the horizon. Only then did she return to the kitchen and pull open the cellar door. Sullivan climbed out, brushing cobwebs from his hair. North, he asked. They'll figure out it was a lie eventually, but it might buy us time. Us? Sullivan raised an eyebrow. Sarah turned away. busying herself with the coffee pot to avoid looking at him. "You said you could prove what happened to Tom, that Bradshaw's running a rustling ring. Well, I want that proof. It won't be easy. Or safe. Neither is being a widow in this country." She turned back to face him. "So here's the deal. Mr. Sullivan, you're still my prisoner, but instead of turning you in, I'm going to help you prove your story. And in return, you're going to help me get justice for my husband." Sullivan studied her for a long moment. "And if I can't prove it, then I'll turn you in myself and collect the reward. Fair?" A slow smile spread across his face, the first genuine one she'd seen from him. "More than fair, ma'am. Though I should warn you, partnering with a wanted man tends to complicate a person's life." Sarah thought of 3 years of empty nights, of whispers in town, of a grave she visited every Sunday with questions that had no answers. "Mr. Sullivan, my life is already complicated. At least now it might have a purpose." Outside, the desert stretched endless and unforgiving beneath the afternoon sun. But for the first time since Tom's death, Sarah felt something other than grief and resignation. It might have been hope, or it might have been something far more dangerous. Word of Sarah harboring a stranger spread through the valley like wildfire. By the 3rd day, she'd already had 2 visits from neighboring ranchers, their wives peering past her shoulder trying to catch a glimpse of whoever was inside. Sarah had kept Sullivan hidden, claiming she'd merely helped a passing drifter who'd moved on after the storm. But in a place where news traveled faster than tumbleweeds, secrets didn't keep long. "The whole town's talking," Mary Patterson announced, settling her ample frame into Sarah's kitchen chair. She'd arrived uninvited, as was her way, bringing a basket of preserves and a hunger for gossip. "Ellen Sawyer says she saw a man's shirt hanging on your line yesterday." Sarah poured coffee with steady hands. "I take in washing sometimes. You know that." "Do I?" Mary's eyes glittered with curiosity. "Because what I heard was that Sheriff Bradshaw's been asking questions about you in town. Says you might be in danger from that outlaw he's chasing." Through the window, Sarah could see Sullivan working in the barn, keeping out of sight as they'd agreed. He'd insisted on earning his keep while they figured out their next move, repairing broken boards and tending the horses. It was strange having a man around the place again. Stranger still that he was a wanted fugitive. "The sheriff's always been concerned about my welfare," Sarah said dryly. Mary leaned forward. "Sarah, honey, I know you've been alone too long, but taking up with a stranger—" "I haven't taken up with anyone." Sarah's voice was sharp enough to cut. "Now, did you come here to share gossip, or did you have something useful to say?" Mary huffed, but wasn't deterred. "I'm trying to help. People are talking. They're saying you've gone peculiar since Tom died. First refusing to sell to Bradshaw when he offered to buy your land. Now this mystery man—" "Bradshaw offered to buy my land." Sarah set down her cup carefully. This was news. "Oh yes, twice last year. Said it was too much for a woman alone to handle. Offered a fair price too, according to him." Mary's voice dropped. "Though between you and me, I heard he made similar offers to the Johnsons before they had that terrible fire that forced them to sell." Sarah's blood ran cold. The Johnsons had lost everything when their barn burned, taking their winter feed and most of their equipment. They'd sold to Bradshaw for pennies on the dollar and moved east. After Mary finally left, trailing threats to return with the church ladies if Sarah didn't start being more social. Sarah found Sullivan in the barn. He was shirtless, sweat gleaming on his back as he hammered a new board into place. The wound on his side had healed to an angry red line. "You shouldn't be working so hard," she said. He turned, reaching for his shirt. "Helps me think. Your friend gone?" "She's not my friend. And yes." Sarah hesitated, then told him about Bradshaw's offers and the Johnson fire. Sullivan's expression darkened. "Fits the pattern. He's been building his own empire out here, piece by piece. Anyone who won't sell or who asks too many questions." Like Tom. He pulled on his shirt, wincing slightly. "Sarah, we need to move soon. Every day we wait gives Bradshaw more time to tighten the noose." "You said you had contacts." People who could verify your story. I did, but reaching them means riding into territory where Bradshaw has eyes everywhere. He paused. There might be another way. Tom kept records. Didn't he? Of his cattle sales? Everything's in his study. I haven't touched it since... She trailed off. Would you mind if I looked? An hour later, they were surrounded by ledgers and papers, the dust of 3 years disturbed. Sullivan worked methodically, cross-referencing dates and numbers while Sarah watched from the doorway, unable to bring herself to fully enter Tom's sanctuary. Here, Sullivan said suddenly. Look at this. Your husband recorded every head of cattle, every sale. But these numbers, he showed her a column of figures. He was tracking discrepancies. See, sold 50 head to Morrison, but Morrison's receipt only shows 45. Happened again and again. Sarah moved closer, drawn despite herself. Tom's neat handwriting brought tears to her eyes. He knew someone was stealing. More than that. Look here. Sullivan pointed to notes in the margins. He was building a case. These initials, CB, that's gotta be Carl Bradshaw. And these dates correspond to when the sheriff was supposedly out of town on business. But this isn't enough proof, is it? Not to convince a judge? Sullivan leaned back, running a hand through his dark hair. No, but it's a start, combined with what I know, and if we could get someone else to talk. A sound outside made them both freeze. Horses. Several of them. Sarah moved to the window, peering through the curtains. Her heart sank. It's Bradshaw. With more men this time. Sullivan was already moving, gathering the most incriminating papers. The cellar. No, they might search this time. Sarah's mind raced. The old well house. It's dry, but the ladder's still good. They slipped out the back as the riders approached the front. Sarah barely had time to see Sullivan disappear into the stone structure before Bradshaw's voice boomed across the yard. Mrs. McKenna, I need a word. She smoothed her skirts and walked around to meet them, counting 8 men, too many for a social call. Sheriff, twice in 1 week. People will talk. Bradshaw didn't smile. Mind if we come in? This is a conversation better had inside. It wasn't a request. Sarah led them to the parlor, noticing how the deputies positioned themselves around the room. Bradshaw settled into Tom's favorite chair without invitation. I'll get to the point, he said. I know Sullivan was here. Sarah kept her expression neutral. I told you, you lied. His voice was flat, matter-of-fact. Mary Patterson mentioned seeing a man's belongings, and Carl here found fresh horse tracks by your barn. So let's try this again. Where is he? I don't know what Mary thinks she saw, but... Bradshaw held up a hand. Sarah. May I call you Sarah? Let me explain your situation. You're a widow, alone, with a failing ranch and no family for 1,000 miles. Accidents happen out here. Fires start. Cattle disappear. Why? You could vanish tomorrow and folks would just assume you finally took your sister's advice and went east. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Sarah lifted her chin. Is that what you told Tom before you killed him? The room went very still. Bradshaw's eyes narrowed. Your husband died in a fair fight. My husband was shot in the back. I saw the wound. Grief can make a person see things that aren't there, make them believe lies told by desperate outlaws. Bradshaw stood, looming over her. I'm trying to protect you. Sarah, Sullivan is using you. Whatever he's told you, whatever he's promised, it's all lies. Like your offers to buy my land? Something flickered in his eyes. That was business. This is different. This is about keeping you safe. From who? Sullivan or from you? Carl Dixon stepped forward, hand on his gun. Watch your tongue. Woman. Bradshaw waved him back. Sarah's upset. It's understandable. Lonely women sometimes make poor choices. He moved closer, and Sarah could smell the tobacco on his breath. But I'm a patient man. I'll give you 1 day to think about this. Tomorrow, you'll tell me where Sullivan is, or things will become unpleasant. After they left, Sarah stood in her parlor, shaking. Not from fear, though that was there too, but from rage. 3 years of suspicion crystallized into certainty. Bradshaw had as good as admitted to killing Tom. She waited until full dark before going to the well house. Sullivan emerged like a shadow, concern written on his face. "I heard the horses leave. Are you all right?" "He threatened me, said I could disappear and no one would ask questions." Sullivan's jaw tightened. "We're leaving. Tonight." "No." Sarah's voice was steady now. "I'm done running, done being afraid. He killed my husband, and I want him to pay for it." "Sarah, be reasonable. He has the law on his side. Men with guns. Then we need to be smarter. You said you had contacts. Who are they?" Sullivan studied her in the moonlight. "There's a U.S. Marshal in Austin, Samuel Cooper. He's been investigating corruption in local law enforcement. If we could get to him. With Tom's records and my testimony. Austin is 5 days' ride. Bradshaw will come for me tomorrow." "Then we leave tonight." Sarah shook her head. "If I run now, I'm admitting guilt. I become a fugitive too, but if I stay, he'll hurt you. Maybe, or maybe I can buy us time." She met his eyes. "You take Tom's records. Ride for Austin. I'll handle Bradshaw." "I'm not leaving you here alone. You don't have a choice. I can't prove you were here, not if you're gone. I'll tell him you stole a horse and supplies. That I was too afraid to stop you. He might believe it." Sullivan moved closer, and for a moment she thought he might touch her. "And if he doesn't, then you'd better ride fast." They prepared quickly. Sarah packed the most damning ledgers and Tom's old saddlebags, while Sullivan readied her best horse. At the barn door, he turned back. "Why are you trusting me? Really?" Sarah considered the question. "Because when you talk about Tom's death, I see the same anger I feel. Either you're the best liar I've ever met, or you actually care about justice. Could be both. Could be, but I'm betting it isn't." He swung into the saddle, then surprised her by reaching down to touch her cheek. "Be careful. Sarah McKenna. I've gotten used to having you point guns at me." Then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness. Sarah stood in the barn doorway long after the sound of hoofbeats faded, wondering if she'd just saved her life or signed her own death warrant. Inside the house, she loaded every gun Tom had owned and settled in to wait for dawn. Whatever came next, she was through being afraid. Bradshaw had taken her husband. He wouldn't take her dignity, too. The wind picked up around midnight, rattling the windows like skeletal fingers. Sarah sat in Tom's chair, rifle across her lap, and let herself remember. Tom's laugh, his terrible singing, the way he'd held her after they'd lost the baby, both of them crying in this very room. "I'll get him. Tom," she whispered to the darkness. "One way or another, I'll make him pay." Outside, a coyote howled, long and mournful. Sarah checked the rifle's chamber one more time and settled in to wait. Dawn would come soon enough, and with it, whatever price she'd have to pay for the truth. Dreams plagued Sarah through the long night. She was back in the churchyard, standing over Tom's grave, but when she looked down, the headstone bore her own name. Tom stood beside her, trying to speak, but no words came from his mouth, only blood, dark and accusing. She woke with a gasp, her nightgown damp with sweat, the rifle still clutched in her white-knuckled hands. The clock on the mantel showed 3 in the morning. The house felt different without Sullivan in it, emptier, but also charged with a strange energy. Sarah rose from the chair, her joints protesting, and moved to the kitchen to splash water on her face. That's when she heard it. A soft creak from the back porch, barely audible over the wind. Sarah's heart hammered as she grabbed the rifle, moving silently to the window. Moonlight revealed nothing, but she knew someone was out there. The hair on the back of her neck stood up, an animal awareness of danger. Another creak, closer to the door now. Sarah positioned herself behind the heavy oak table, rifle raised. If they were coming for her early, she'd make them regret it. The doorknob rattled, tested from outside. Then silence. The window shattered. Glass exploded inward as a body came crashing through. Sarah fired instinctively, the rifle's report deafening in the small kitchen. The intruder hit the floor rolling, came up fast, too fast. Before she could chamber another round, he was on her. But it wasn't one of Bradshaw's men. "Sarah, stop! It's me!" Sullivan's voice, urgent in her ear as he wrestled the rifle away. She went limp with shock. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be—" "Shh!" He pressed a finger to her lips, listening. "They're out there. Saw them moving in from the ridge. Came back to warn you." "How many?" "4, maybe 5. They're surrounding the house." Sarah's mind raced. "The storm cellar! We can—" Fire suddenly bloomed in the darkness outside. Someone had lit a torch, then another. Through the broken window, Sarah could see figures moving, circling her home like wolves. "Mrs. McKenna!" Bradshaw's voice boomed from outside. "Come out now, and this ends peaceful. Make us come in after you, and I can't guarantee your safety." Sullivan had moved to the front window, peering through the curtains. "He's got men at every corner, no way out without a fight. Then we fight." "Sarah." "No." She grabbed Tom's pistol from the sideboard, checking the chambers. "I'm tired of running, tired of being afraid. If they want a war, they'll get one." Sullivan studied her face in the dim light. Something shifted in his expression, respect mixed with something else she couldn't quite name. "All right, but we do this smart. You still have that shotgun?" 10 minutes later, they were as ready as they could be. Windows barricaded, weapons loaded and placed strategically around the rooms. Sarah had changed into Tom's old work clothes. Easier to move in than skirts if it came to running. "Last chance, Mrs. McKenna," Bradshaw called. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Sarah moved to the front window. "What happened to giving me until tomorrow? Sheriff?" "Plans change. Sullivan was spotted heading back this way. Figured you two might be planning something we couldn't allow." "I told you he left, and yet here we are." Bradshaw's voice hardened. "You've got 1 minute to come out, or we're coming in." Sarah looked at Sullivan. He'd positioned himself by the back door, rifle ready, in the lamplight. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the coiled readiness of a man who'd faced death before. But there was something else, too, a protectiveness that made her chest tight. "Why did you come back?" she asked softly. "You could have been halfway to Austin by now." He met her eyes across the room. "Couldn't leave you to face them alone. Wouldn't have been right. Even if it means getting caught? Even then." The minute was up. Outside. Bradshaw barked orders. Sarah heard boots on the porch, moving to multiple entry points. Her hands were steady on the pistol, but her heart felt like it might break free from her ribs. The front door exploded inward. Sarah fired, the pistol bucking in her hand. A man stumbled back, clutching his shoulder. Behind him, she saw Carl Dixon raising his gun. She dove behind the overturned table as wood splintered above her head. From the back of the house came the boom of Sullivan's rifle, followed by cursing and return fire, the air filled with gun smoke and the sharp smell of sulfur. "Take them alive if you can," Bradshaw roared. "But take them!" A figure appeared in the doorway. Sarah fired again, missing as he ducked back. Her hands shook as she reloaded. This wasn't like shooting coyotes or rattlesnakes. These were men, even if they were trying to kill her. Glass shattered somewhere. More gunfire from Sullivan's position. Then a cry of pain, not Sullivan's voice. "Thank God." "Sarah," Sullivan called. "Kitchen." She scrambled toward his voice, keeping low. A bullet whined past her ear, so close she felt the wind of it. In the kitchen, Sullivan had overturned the heavy table for cover. Blood trickled from a cut on his cheek. "You hit?" "Just glass," he said, reloading. "But we can't hold them. Too many." He was right. She could hear boots throughout the house now, men moving tactically through the rooms. They were being surrounded, compressed into a smaller and smaller space. "The cellar?" she suggested desperately. "They'll just burn us out." He looked at her, something fierce and desperate in his eyes. "Sarah, listen. When I tell you to run, you go out the back. Head for the well house, then the canyon. Don't stop. Don't look back. I'm not leaving you." "Damn it, woman! This isn't the time for... The kitchen door frame exploded in a shower of splinters. Dixon appeared, gun raised. Time seemed to slow. Sarah saw his finger tighten on the trigger, saw the barrel swing towards Sullivan. She moved without thinking, throwing herself forward. The gunshot was impossibly loud. Pain bloomed in her shoulder like fire, spinning her around. She hit the floor hard, gasping. "Sarah!" Sullivan's rifle spoke, and Dixon went down. Then Sullivan was beside her, pressing something against her shoulder. "Why did you do that?" "Couldn't let them shoot you," she managed through gritted teeth. More men were coming. Sullivan gathered her against him with one arm, firing with the other. The world was going gray at the edges, but Sarah fought to stay conscious. Then, unexpectedly, silence fell. "Sullivan," Bradshaw's voice, closer now. "Let's talk terms." "Nothing to talk about," Sullivan called back, not taking his eyes off the doorway. "The woman's hit. She needs a doctor. Surrender now, and I'll see she gets help." Sarah grabbed Sullivan's shirt with her good hand. "Don't trust him." "I know." He looked down at her, and she was surprised to see moisture in his eyes. "But you're losing blood. Better to die than let him win." Something changed in Sullivan's face then. A decision made. He carefully laid her back against the floor, then stood. "All right, Bradshaw, I'm coming out, but the woman gets a doctor. Your word on it. You have it." "No!" Sarah tried to rise, but the pain was too much. "Jake, don't." He knelt beside her one more time. His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing away a tear she didn't know she'd shed. Then he leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was fierce, desperate, full of words they hadn't said and might never get to say. It was acknowledgement of what had grown between them in these strange, dangerous days. Captor and prisoner no more, but something else entirely. When he pulled back, his eyes held hers. "Stay alive, Sarah McKenna. Whatever happens, stay alive." Then he was standing, hands raised, walking toward the doorway. "I'm unarmed, Bradshaw, coming out." Sarah could only watch, her vision blurring. As Sullivan disappeared from view, she heard Bradshaw's satisfied voice, the sounds of struggle, Sullivan's grunt of pain as they struck him. "Got him, boys. Now let's..." Bradshaw appeared in the doorway, looking down at her with cold satisfaction. "Well, Mrs. McKenna, looks like your poor judgment finally caught up with you. You murdered my husband," she managed. Bradshaw knelt beside her, his face a mask of false concern. "Now why would you go and say something like that? Everyone knows Tom Drew first, just like everyone's going to know how you took up with an outlaw, helped him escape, and tragically died in the crossfire when we tried to apprehend him. People will ask questions. Some might. But with you dead and Sullivan hanged, who's going to contradict the official story?" He stood, gesturing to his men. "Take her out back. Make it look like Sullivan did it. Lovers' quarrel gone wrong." Through the growing darkness, Sarah heard Sullivan roar her name, heard the sounds of struggle, then a gunshot, followed by terrible silence. Hands grabbed her roughly, dragging her across the floor. The pain was overwhelming, but worse was the thought that she'd failed. Failed Tom, failed Sullivan, failed herself. As they dragged her past the parlor, her dimming vision caught sight of Tom's portrait on the wall. In her delirium, she could swear he was trying to tell her something. His eyes, always so kind in life, seemed to be directing her toward the hidden pistol, the one Tom had always kept behind the portrait frame, paranoid about home invasion, the one she'd forgotten about until this moment. Sarah let herself go limp, playing closer to death than she was. The men relaxed their grip slightly, thinking her nearly gone. As they adjusted their hold to carry her through the door, she found her moment. With the last of her strength, she wrenched free and lunged for the portrait. Her fingers found the familiar grip of Tom's backup revolver, in one fluid motion born of desperation. She turned and fired. The man holding her left arm went down. The second man reached for his gun, but adrenaline gave her speed. The second shot took him in the chest. Bradshaw appeared in the doorway, gun drawn. Face twisted with rage, Sarah's third shot went wide, shattering the window behind him. He dove for cover as she scrambled behind Tom's chair. "You're just prolonging the inevitable," he shouted. Maybe, but she'd be damned if she'd make it easy for him. Sarah checked the cylinder. 3 shots left. Her shoulders screamed with every movement, blood soaking through Sullivan's makeshift bandage. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of movement. Sullivan, hands tied, being forced onto a horse, alive. He was still alive. That was all that mattered now. If she could buy him time, create enough chaos, maybe he could escape. Maybe he could still get to Austin, still bring justice for Tom. Sarah McKenna smiled through her pain and prepared to make her last stand. After all, she'd already been dead for 3 years. What was one more ghost in this desert full of them? The sound of approaching hoofbeats cut through the tension like a blade, not from the direction of town, but from the eastern ridge where the old cattle trail wound through the mesquite. Sarah pressed herself deeper behind Tom's chair, trying to count the riders through her pain-hazed vision. 6, maybe 7, moving fast. "Sheriff!" one of Bradshaw's men called from outside. "Riders coming!" Bradshaw cursed viciously. "Who the hell?" He moved to the window, peering out cautiously. His face went pale. "That's Ben Morrison. And the Garrett brothers. What are they doing here?" Sarah's heart leaped. Ben Morrison, the cattle buyer Tom had been meeting with the day he died. And the Garretts, honest ranchers who'd lost stock to rustlers over the years. But why would they come here? Now? The riders thundered into the yard, and Morrison's booming voice carried clearly. "Bradshaw, we know you're in there. Come out and face what's coming." "This is official business." "Morrison," Bradshaw shouted back. "Interfere and you'll hang alongside these outlaws. Only outlaws I see are wearing badges." Morrison replied. "We got Sullivan's message. Got the papers he sent ahead. And we've had enough of your thieving ways." Sarah's mind reeled. Sullivan had sent a message? When? Then she remembered. He'd been gone for hours before returning. Long enough to reach the Morrison ranch if he'd ridden hard. "You're making a mistake," Bradshaw called. But uncertainty had crept into his voice. "The mistake was letting you run this county like your personal kingdom," another voice added. Jim Garrett, whose quiet manner belied his skill with a gun. Tom McKenna was a good man. He didn't deserve to die for asking questions. Through the window, Sarah could see more riders appearing on the horizon. Word was spreading. The decent folks of the valley, tired of being prey, were finally standing up. Bradshaw must have seen them too, his face twisted with rage as he turned back to where Sarah hid. "This is your doing, you meddling—" Gunfire erupted outside. Not a battle, but warning shots. Morrison's voice rang out again. "Let Mrs. McKenna and Sullivan go. Bradshaw, it's over." "Like hell it is." Bradshaw raised his gun toward Sarah's position. Time slowed. Sarah saw his finger tighten on the trigger, knew her 3 remaining bullets might not be enough. But before either could fire, the front door burst open. Jake Sullivan stood there, hands still bound but no longer captive. Blood ran from a cut above his eye, and his shirt was torn, but his eyes blazed with deadly purpose. Behind him, she glimpsed one of Bradshaw's men on the ground, unconscious or dead. Bradshaw spun toward him, gun swinging around. Sullivan charged, hitting the sheriff with his shoulder, both men crashing to the floor. They rolled, fighting for the weapon. Sarah tried to get a clear shot, but they were moving too fast, too entangled. The gun went off. Both men stilled. "Jake!" Sarah struggled to her feet, her wounded shoulders screaming protest. Slowly, Sullivan rolled away from Bradshaw. The sheriff lay still, a spreading red stain on his chest. His own gun had turned against him in the struggle. Sullivan looked up at her, breathing hard. "Sarah, you're—" His face went white as he took in her bloodied shoulder. "How bad?" "I'll live." She moved unsteadily toward him. "How did you get free?" "Your friends out there provided a distraction. Seems I wasn't the only one collecting evidence against Bradshaw." He struggled with his bonds until Sarah produced a knife from Tom's desk drawer and cut him loose. Outside, Morrison was taking charge. "Garrett, take some men and round up the rest of Bradshaw's boys. Williams, ride for town and fetch the doctor. And someone get the U.S. Marshal's office in Austin. Tell them we've got a situation that needs federal attention." Sarah swayed on her feet, and Sullivan caught her, careful of her shoulder. "Easy now. It's over." "Is it?" She looked down at Bradshaw's still form. "He's dead. The truth might die with him." "No." Sullivan's voice was firm. "We have Tom's records. We have witnesses now, Morrison and the others. And we have this." He pulled a folded paper from inside his shirt, stained with blood but still readable. "Found it in Bradshaw's coat when they were tying me up. It's a contract with a cattle syndicate back east, showing he was selling stolen beef under official cover. Names, dates, amounts, everything we need." Sarah took the paper with trembling fingers. 3 years of questions, 3 years of grief, and here was the proof in black and white. Tom had been right. He died for being right. "Mrs. McKenna." Ben Morrison appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. We all do. We should have stood up to Bradshaw long ago. Maybe if we had, Tom would still—" "Don't." Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. "Tom wouldn't want you carrying that guilt. He'd want us to make things right going forward." Morrison nodded, clearly relieved. "Yes, ma'am. The doc's on his way, and we'll make sure everything's handled proper. You have my word." As Morrison left to organize the cleanup, Sarah became aware that Sullivan still held her, his arms steady and warm around her. She looked up at him, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time, not as an outlaw or a prisoner, but as the man who'd risked everything to help her find justice. "You came back," she said softly. "You could have kept riding, but you came back. Had to." His hand came up to cup her uninjured cheek. "Couldn't let you face them alone. Couldn't let them—" His voice roughened. "When I heard that gunshot, thought I'd lost you before I ever really had you. Jake, I know we've done this all backwards," he continued. "Started with you holding me at gunpoint, and now here we are in the middle of all this death and violence. But Sarah, these past days with you, even being your prisoner was better than being free anywhere else." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I don't even know who you really are. Sullivan might not even be your real name." "It is. Jake Sullivan from Virginia. Former Pinkerton. Current pain in the neck to corrupt lawmen everywhere." He smiled slightly. "Not much to offer a woman like you. I've got no land, no cattle, no roots. Just a horse and a reputation that'll take some time to clear." "And what makes you think I want anything else?" Sarah challenged. "I've got land. I've got cattle. What I don't have—" She paused, gathering courage. "What I haven't had in 3 years is someone who makes me feel alive again." His eyes darkened. "Sarah, I'm not saying it'll be easy," she continued. "People will talk. The widow and the outlaw. It'll be a scandal from here to Austin. Let them talk." Jake's voice was fierce. "After what we've been through, town gossip seems pretty tame." Outside, they could hear the doctor arriving, Morrison organizing the removal of bodies, the gradual restoration of order, but inside the bullet-scarred house, time seemed suspended. "So what happens now?" Sarah asked. "After the marshal comes? After your name is cleared?" Jake was quiet for a moment. "Depends. The Cattlemen's Association will probably want me to take another job. There's always another corrupt sheriff somewhere, another town being bled dry by thieves with badges." Sarah's heart sank. Of course, a man like him wouldn't be content to settle down and ranch. The adventure, the justice-seeking, it was in his blood. "But," he continued, "I've been thinking maybe it's time for a change. Maybe find a place to put down those roots. Help a certain widow run her ranch, if she'd have me, after all." His smile turned teasing. "I still owe her for room and board. Might take years to work off that debt." "Years?" Sarah couldn't help but smile back, despite everything. "Mr. Sullivan, I believe you're taking advantage of my generous nature." Maybe. He grew serious again. But I mean it. Sarah, if you'll have me, not as your prisoner this time, but as partner, friend, maybe something more. I'd like to stay. Sarah thought of Tom, of the life they'd built and lost. He wouldn't want her to spend forever in mourning. He'd want her to find happiness again, even if it came in the unlikely form of a former outlaw with kind eyes and gentle hands. Well, she said finally, I suppose I could use help with the ranch, and you do owe me a horse. You rode off with my best one. Is that a yes? Instead of answering with words. Sarah pulled his head down and kissed him. Not the desperate kiss of what might have been their last moments, but something softer, full of promise and possibility. When they broke apart, Jake was grinning. I'll take that as a yes. Doc's here, Morrison called from outside. Mrs. McKenna needs tending, as the doctor bustled in, tisking over her shoulder wound. Sarah kept her eyes on Jake. He stood guard by the window, watching for any remaining threats. But his gaze kept returning to her. The sun was rising, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. Through the broken windows, Sarah could smell sage and dust and the promise of rain on the distant mountains. The house would need repair. The ranch would need work. Her reputation might never recover from harboring a fugitive, but for the first time in 3 years, Sarah McKenna felt hope unfurling in her chest like a desert flower after rain. Tom was gone, but his killer had faced justice. She'd found answers, and in seeking them, had found something else, someone else, worth living for. Hold still, Mrs. McKenna, the doctor admonished as he worked. This is going to hurt. Sarah reached out with her good hand, and Jake took it, his fingers strong and sure around hers. I can handle it, she said, and meant more than just the medical treatment. I've handled worse. As the new day dawned over the Texas plains, washing away the shadows of night, Sarah McKenna allowed herself to believe that the worst was truly over. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but no longer empty, and she wouldn't face it alone. The bounty hunters came at dusk, 3 days after Bradshaw's death. Sarah first spotted the dust cloud from the kitchen window where she stood washing dishes, her wounded shoulder still stiff but healing. The approaching riders moved with purpose, spread out in a formation that spoke of experience and deadly intent. Jake, she called, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. He appeared from the barn where he'd been working, took one look at her face, and followed her gaze to the horizon. His expression darkened. How many? 8, maybe 9. Sarah dried her hands, already moving toward the rifles. Coming fast. Get inside. Jake's voice brooked no argument. Bar the doors. But Sarah had learned something in the past days. She was done hiding. We faced them together. They didn't have long to prepare. Jake quickly explained that Bradshaw must have wired other bounty hunters before his death, men who wouldn't care about cleared names or federal marshals. The $500 bounty on Jake's head was still valid until officially rescinded, and these men meant to collect. The riders thundered into the yard as the sun touched the horizon, painting everything in shades of blood and gold. Their leader, a scarred man with cold gray eyes, dismounted slowly, hands visible but ready. Sullivan, he called. Name's Wade Garrison. I believe you know why we're here. Jake stepped onto the porch, rifle held casual but ready. Sarah flanked him, her own weapon trained on the group. Several of the bounty hunters shifted nervously. They hadn't expected armed resistance from the widow. Turn around and ride out, Garrison, Jake said calmly. The warrant's being withdrawn. I've been cleared. Garrison spat tobacco juice into the dust. That's a real nice story. But we didn't ride 3 days to leave empty-handed. Way I see it, you're worth $500. The widow here. His eyes raked over Sarah with insulting familiarity. Well, she might be worth something too, harboring a fugitive and all. Watch your tongue, Jake warned, his voice dropping dangerous low. Or what? Garrison grinned, showing yellowed teeth. You'll shoot? Go ahead. My boys will cut you down before you chamber another round, then we'll take our time with the pretty widow." Sarah felt Jake tense beside her, but before he could respond, the sound of approaching horses made everyone turn. Ben Morrison rode in with 6 men, all armed, all wearing grim expressions. "Evening, gentlemen," Morrison said pleasantly. "Couldn't help but notice you rode past my place without stopping to state your business. That's considered rude in these parts." Garrison's eyes narrowed. "This ain't your concern, rancher. See, that's where you're wrong." Morrison dismounted, his hand resting on his pistol. "Mrs. McKenna is our neighbor. Mr. Sullivan here helped expose a corrupt sheriff who was stealing from all of us. That makes this very much our concern." More riders appeared, the Garrett brothers from the south, the Williamses from the east. Word had spread through the valley as it always did, carried on swift horses and righteous anger. "You want Sullivan? You go through us," Jim Garrett said quietly. "All of us." Garrison looked around, calculating odds. His men were outnumbered nearly 3 to 1, and these weren't scared townspeople. These were ranchers who'd survived Apache raids and cattle wars. "This is a legal bounty," he protested. "You're interfering with the law. The only law that matters out here is what's right," Morrison replied. "And letting you take these folks ain't right. Now, I'll ask you polite-like to move on. Next time I won't ask." The tension stretched taut as barbed wire. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the sweat trickling down her spine despite the evening cool. One wrong move, one nervous trigger finger, and the yard would become a battlefield. It was Jake who broke the standoff. He slowly set down his rifle and stepped forward, hands visible. "Garrison, you're a businessman. Let's talk business." The bounty hunter's eyes glinted with interest. "I'm listening." $500 to bring me in dead or alive, but what if I could offer you something better? Information worth twice that to the right people. "Jake, no," Sarah whispered, but he continued. "There's a rustling ring operating out of Mexico, moving stolen cattle across the border. I've got names, routes, contacts, information the Cattlemen's Association would pay well for. More than any bounty." Garrison considered. "And why would you give me that?" "Because I want to buy my freedom, real freedom, not looking over my shoulder for the next bounty hunter. You take the information, claim you couldn't find me, everyone wins. Except the rustlers." Jake shrugged. "They're actual criminals, unlike me." Long moments passed. Sarah held her breath. Finally, Garrison nodded slowly. "Write it down. Everything. If it checks out, we never found you." As Jake went inside to write the information, Garrison's eyes found Sarah. "You're luckier than you know. Widow. Most men would have run, left you to face us alone." "He's not most men," Sarah replied. "No," Garrison agreed. "Which is why I'm curious. What's a woman like you doing with a gunfighter like him?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Finding out what it means to live again." Jake returned with several pages of closely written information. Garrison read through them, his expression growing more interested with each page. "This is good. Real good." He folded the papers carefully. "All right. Sullivan, you've bought yourself a chance. But if this information proves false, it won't." Garrison remounted, his men following suit. As they prepared to ride out, he looked back. "Word of advice. That federal marshal's going to take his time getting here. Until your name's officially cleared, there'll be others like me, maybe not as reasonable. We'll be ready," Jake said. After the bounty hunters disappeared into the gathering darkness, the ranchers began to disperse. Morrison lingered, studying Jake with new interest. "That information you gave him? It was real?" "Every word," Jake confirmed. "Been tracking that ring for months before I came here. Figured it might come in handy as a bargaining chip someday." Morrison shook his head admiringly. "You're either the smartest man I've met or the luckiest." "Maybe both," Sarah suggested, surprised to find she could smile. When they were alone again, Sarah and Jake stood on the porch watching the stars emerge. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and the distant promise of rain. "You took a big risk," Sarah said. "If those ranchers hadn't shown up." "They did, though. That's what matters." Jake turned to face her. "Sarah, Garrison was right. There might be others. This isn't over. I know. You could still leave. Go to your sister until—" Sarah silenced him with a kiss. Soft but sure. When she pulled back, her eyes were fierce. "I'm not going anywhere. We started this together. We'll finish it together." Jake pulled her close, mindful of her healing shoulder. "How did I get so lucky?" "Maybe it wasn't luck," Sarah murmured against his chest. "Maybe it was fate." They stood there as the desert night deepened around them. Two souls who'd found each other in violence and loss, but were building something new from the ashes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, they had this, each other, and the stubborn hope that love could bloom even in the harshest ground. Inside the house, the lamp burned steady, pushing back the darkness. And in the distance, a coyote's howl rose to the stars. Not mournful this time, but wild and free, like a celebration of survival against all odds. The sound of horses approaching again made them both tense, but it was only Doc Williams, come to check Sarah's shoulder. "Heard you had some excitement," he said, dismounting with a grunt. "Figured I'd better make sure you hadn't torn open that wound." As the doctor examined her shoulder, he kept up a steady stream of chatter about the town's reaction to recent events. "Haven't seen folks this riled up since the Apache raids of '71. Course, most are saying it's about time someone stood up to Bradshaw. Should have happened years ago." "What about the sheriff's men?" Jake asked. "Dixon and the others." "Most lit out for other territories. A few are talking to that federal marshal who finally showed up, trying to save their own skins by testifying." The doctor rewrapped Sarah's bandage. "You're healing well, Mrs. McKenna. Another week and you'll be good as new." After the doctor left, Sarah and Jake prepared a simple meal together, moving around the kitchen with an ease that belied their short acquaintance. It felt domestic, normal, a glimpse of what life could be when the danger finally passed. "I've been thinking," Jake said as they ate, "about what comes after, when my name's cleared." Sarah waited, her heart suddenly racing. "This ranch needs work. That barn's about to fall down, and your fence lines need riding. Could take a man months to get it all in shape." "Months," Sarah repeated, fighting a smile. "Maybe longer. And then there's the cattle. Need to build the herd back up. Establish new contracts now that Bradshaw's not skimming. Could be a year's work, maybe two." "That long?" Jake reached across the table, taking her hand. "Could be a lifetime's work if the right partner was involved." Sarah turned her hand, interlacing their fingers. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "Depends. Would the answer be yes?" Before she could respond, thunder rumbled overhead. The promised rain began to fall. First a few drops, then a steady downpour. They rushed to close windows and check the stock, laughing as they got soaked in the process. Later, sitting by the fire drying off, Sarah gave him her answer. "Yes, to all of it. The work, the partnership, everything." Jake kissed her then, long and sweet, while outside the rain washed the desert clean. It felt like a benediction, a blessing on new beginnings. But even in that moment of happiness, both knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Jake's name still needed clearing. The ranch needed rebuilding. And somewhere out there, more bounty hunters might be riding their way. The cave was their last refuge, carved into the red rock face of Diablo Canyon, where ancient waters had hollowed out the stone. Sarah pressed against the cool wall, trying to steady her breathing as Jake carefully cleaned her reopened shoulder wound by the light filtering through the narrow entrance. They had fled at dawn when the second wave of bounty hunters arrived. Harder men than Garrison's crew, men who didn't negotiate. The running battle across the desert had left both horses dead and forced them into the labyrinth of canyons that scarred the landscape like old wounds. "Hold still," Jake murmured, his fingers gentle despite the urgency. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage, and Sarah bit her lip against the pain. "How many are left?" she asked. 3, maybe 4. He tied off the bandage with strips torn from his shirt. Lost at least 2 in that rock slide. Sarah managed a weak smile. Good thing you knew about this place. Tracked a rustler here once. Never thought I'd be the one hiding. His jaw tightened. Sarah, I'm sorry. This is my fault. You should be safe at home, not... She pressed her fingers to his lips. Don't. We've been through this. I chose to stay. I chose you. Thunder rolled across the canyon, and the first fat drops of rain began to fall. A desert storm, sudden and violent. It would wash away their tracks, but also trap them here until it passed. Jake moved to the cave entrance, peering out cautiously. The narrow approach meant their enemies would have to come single file, an advantage, but also a trap if they were discovered. He checked his ammunition. Not much left. Tell me about Virginia, Sarah said suddenly. He looked back at her. Surprised. Now? We might not get another chance. Her voice was steady despite everything. I want to know where you came from, who you were before all this. Jake was quiet for a moment, then returned to sit beside her, his back against the stone. Outside, the rain intensified, turning the world into sheets of gray. Had a small farm outside Richmond, he began. Nothing fancy, but it was ours, my parents, 2 sisters, and me. Grew tobacco, some corn, had a few horses. His voice softened with memory. My mother had this garden, roses and honeysuckle, said it reminded her of home in Ireland. What happened to them? The war happened. His voice went flat. I was 16 when it started. Too young to enlist, but that didn't matter when the fighting came to our doorstep. Lost everything in one afternoon. Family, farm, future, all of it burned. Sarah took his hand, feeling the old pain in his words. After that, I drifted. Tried my hand at different things. Found I was good at reading people, tracking, solving problems. The Pinkertons recruited me in '71. Spent years hunting train robbers and rustlers. Got good at it, maybe too good. How so? Started seeing patterns others missed. Realized some of the biggest thieves wore badges. Made enemies trying to expose them. He laughed bitterly. Should have learned my lesson before coming here. But when the Cattlemen's Association offered good money to investigate the losses, you couldn't resist a puzzle. Sarah finished. Something like that. He turned to study her face. What about you? How does a woman end up alone on a ranch in the middle of nowhere? Sarah leaned into his warmth. I wasn't always alone. Came out here with Tom 7 years ago. We had such dreams, building something from nothing, making the desert bloom. He used to say we'd have 12 children and 100 grandchildren, that we'd found our promised land. He sounds like a good man. He was stubborn, hot-tempered sometimes, but good. When we lost the baby, she paused, old grief surfacing. The doctor said I couldn't have more. Tom never blamed me, but I saw it in his eyes sometimes. The dynasty that would never be. Sarah. Then he was gone, and I was alone with all those dreams turned to dust. For 3 years, I've been going through the motions, feeding cattle, mending fences, existing. She met his eyes, until a wounded outlaw collapsed on my porch and reminded me what it felt like to be alive. Jake cupped her face with one hand. You saved me that night, in more ways than one. We saved each other. The storm raged outside, water now cascading past the cave entrance in muddy torrents. They were safe for the moment, cocooned in stone while the desert tried to drown itself. When this is over, Jake said quietly, when my name is cleared and the last bounty hunter gives up, what then? Do we try to make those dreams work? The ones you had with Tom? Sarah considered the question. Not the same dreams. Those belong to a different life, a different woman. But new dreams. Maybe the ranch is still there. The land still needs tending. And maybe... She hesitated, then forged ahead. Maybe it doesn't need 12 children. Maybe it just needs 2 people who understand that life is precious and short and worth fighting for. Is that a proposal, Mrs. McKenna? Despite everything, the pain, the danger, the uncertainty. Sarah laughed. "Jake Sullivan, we're trapped in a cave with men trying to kill us. This is hardly the time." He kissed her, cutting off her words. It was different from their other kisses, slower, deeper, infused with the knowledge that this might truly be their last chance. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "Seemed like the perfect time to me," he said. A sound outside made them freeze. Voices, barely audible over the storm. The hunters had found them. Jake moved swiftly, positioning himself at the cave entrance. Sarah struggled to her feet, grabbing her rifle despite the burning in her shoulder. "In there somewhere," a voice carried on the wind. "Saw them climb. Wait for the rain to stop," another suggested. "They're not going anywhere." Jake and Sarah exchanged glances. Trapped, just as they'd feared. But the storm was already beginning to slacken, the downpour easing to a steady rain. "How's your shoulder?" Jake whispered. "Good enough to shoot." He smiled grimly. "That's my girl." The next hour passed in tense silence. The rain stopped, leaving only the drip of water and the distant rumble of flash floods in the lower canyons. Sarah could hear the hunters moving outside, taking positions. "Sullivan," a voice finally called. "We know you're in there. Come out and we'll make it quick. The woman too. No need for suffering. Generous of you." Jake called back. "But we'll pass. You're outnumbered and outgunned. That cave's got one way out. We can wait." It was true. Their water was limited. Ammunition low. Time favored the hunters. "I could surrender," Jake said quietly. "They want me, not you. If I go out, they'll kill you and then come for me anyway." Sarah's voice was firm. "We both know that." More movement outside. The hunters were getting impatient. Then, unexpectedly, new sounds, horses approaching fast, shouts of alarm from the bounty hunters. "What the hell?" one of them exclaimed. Gunfire erupted, but not aimed at the cave. Sarah heard horses scattering, men cursing, the crack of rifles from multiple directions. "Jake Sullivan!" A new voice boomed across the canyon. "This is you as Marshal Samuel Cooper. I'm ordering all parties to lay down their weapons." Jake's face lit with disbelief and hope. Cooper made it. More shooting. Then gradually, silence. After several tense minutes, footsteps approached the cave. "Sullivan, you in there?" "Marshal Cooper," Jake called back. "That really you?" "In the flesh. Though you led me on quite a chase. Mind coming out? We've got these bounty hunters sorted, but I'd like to make everything official." Jake helped Sarah to the cave entrance. Outside, a dozen federal officers had the surviving bounty hunters disarmed and under guard. Marshal Cooper, a weathered man with shrewd eyes, touched his hat to Sarah. "Mrs. McKenna, apologies for the delay. Got Sullivan's message and the evidence he sent, but takes time to mobilize federal resources." He turned to Jake. "You're a hard man to find when you don't want to be found. Had good reason to stay hidden?" "Not anymore." Cooper produced an official-looking document. "Full pardon and reinstatement. Turns out you uncovered one of the biggest corruption rings in Texas. The government's grateful." Sarah felt Jake's tension drain away as he read the document. Free, finally. Truly free. There's more. Cooper continued. "The Cattlemen's Association wants to offer you a permanent position. Full backing, federal authority. Seems they need someone who can't be bought or intimidated." Jake looked at Sarah, a question in his eyes. "Whatever you decide," she said softly. "We decide together." Cooper cleared his throat. "Ma'am, there's also the matter of restitution. The government's prepared to compensate you for your husband's death, now that we've proven Bradshaw's involvement." Sarah shook her head. "I don't want blood money. I just wanted the truth. And you got it, thanks to Sullivan here." Cooper studied them both. "Though from what I hear, you gave as good as you got. Not many women would face down corrupt sheriffs and bounty hunters." "Not many women have as much to fight for," Sarah replied, her hand finding Jake's, as the federal officers prepared to transport their prisoners. Jake and Sarah stood at the canyon rim, looking out over the rain-washed desert. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and sharp. In the distance, a rainbow arced across the sky. "So," Jake said finally, "about that permanent position. You'd be good at it." Sarah said, "Making sure what happened here doesn't happen elsewhere. But then you'd be gone for weeks, months at a time, and I've gotten used to having you around." Jake turned to face her fully. "What if I took local cases only, based out of the county? I could help rebuild the sheriff's office, make sure it stays clean, still do investigations, but come home at night." Sarah smiled. "I think I could live with that." "Home," Jake repeated, as if tasting the word. "Been a long time since I had one of those." "Well, you do now, if you want it." Instead of answering with words, Jake pulled her close, there on the canyon rim with federal marshals and captured outlaws as witnesses. And Sarah knew that all the pain, all the fear, all the dangerous days had been worth it for this moment, standing in the clean desert air with a man who'd started as her prisoner but had become her salvation. The past was laid to rest with its ghosts and grief. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but no longer empty. And in between, in this precious present, two wounded souls had found in each other the strength to heal. "Let's go home," Jake said against her hair. "Yes," Sarah agreed. "Let's go home." The morning sun painted the desert in shades of gold and rose as Sarah McKenna stood on her porch, watching the town slowly come alive. 3 months had passed since the confrontation in Diablo Canyon. 3 months of rebuilding and renewal. The scars remained, on her shoulder, on the bullet-pocked walls of her home. But they were healing, becoming part of the story rather than the end of it. "Coffee's ready," Jake called from inside. She smiled at how natural that sounded now. Jake Sullivan, former outlaw, current deputy marshal, making coffee in what had once been Tom's kitchen. The ghosts were finally at peace. The town had changed too. With Bradshaw gone and honest law enforcement in place, prosperity was returning. Ranchers no longer lost mysterious percentages of their herds. The Morrison family had expanded their operation. Even Mary Patterson had stopped her gossiping long enough to admit she'd been wrong about Sarah. "Big day," Jake said, joining her on the porch with 2 steaming cups. Sarah accepted hers gratefully. "Are you sure about this?" "Been sure since that night you tied me up in your barn." He grinned at her expression. "Maybe sure before that, if I'm honest." Today they would stand before the circuit judge and make official what their hearts had already decided. It wouldn't be a large wedding, just a few friends, the people who'd stood by them when it mattered. Morrison had offered to give Sarah away. The Garrett brothers would stand as witnesses. "Your sister's letter came yesterday," Jake mentioned. "Did you read it?" Sarah nodded. Martha had been scandalized at first, her widowed sister marrying a former fugitive, but Jake had written to her, a long letter explaining everything, taking responsibility for the danger he'd brought while praising Sarah's courage. Martha's latest message was considerably warmer, even mentioning a possible visit come spring. "She wants to meet the man who made me reckless." Sarah laughed. Her words. "Reckless?" Jake pulled her close. "You were pointing guns at strangers before I ever showed up. Only the ones who deserved it." They stood together, watching the desert wake. A roadrunner darted across the yard, chasing some invisible prey. In the distance, dust devils danced on the horizon like celebrating spirits. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked quietly. "You could have taken that position with the association, traveled, seen more of the country." Jake set down his coffee and turned her to face him. "Sarah, I spent years drifting, never belonging anywhere, always looking for the next job, the next fight. You know what I found?" She shook her head. "Empty hotel rooms and cold campfires. Justice served, but no one to share it with." He touched her cheek. "That night I stumbled onto your porch. I wasn't just running from Bradshaw's men. I was running from a life that had stopped making sense. You gave me a reason to stop running. By tying you up and threatening to shoot you, by seeing me as more than just another outlaw, by trusting me with your truth and fighting beside me for justice." His voice roughened. by reminding me that life is about more than just surviving. Sarah blinked back tears. Tom used to say something similar, that surviving wasn't the same as living. Smart man. Jake glanced toward the small cemetery on the hill. You think he'd approve? Sarah followed his gaze. She'd visited Tom's grave the day before, laying fresh flowers and finally saying goodbye. I think he'd be glad I found someone who makes me want to plant roses again. Roses? And honeysuckle, like your mother grew. She smiled at his surprise. The hardware store ordered some shoots from back east. Thought we might start a garden. Bring some beauty to all this dust and stone. Jake kissed her then, soft and sweet in the morning light. When they parted, his eyes held promises of all the mornings to come. The sound of approaching wagons interrupted them. The Morrisons arriving early, as usual, followed by what looked like half the county. Sarah stared in amazement as wagon after wagon pulled up to her property. What is this? Ben Morrison climbed down, grinning broadly. Wedding present from your neighbors. Figured you two had done enough fighting. Time for some celebrating. The wagons were loaded with lumber, supplies, furniture, everything needed to repair the battle damage and more. Men were already unloading, organizing work crews. We can't accept this, Sarah protested. Sure you can, Mary Patterson declared, emerging from the crowd with an armload of fabric. The women folk have been sewing for weeks. New curtains, tablecloths, even a wedding quilt. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the generosity. These people who had whispered about her, who had stood by while Bradshaw ruled through fear, were now offering their hands in friendship and support. Thank you, she managed. All of you. Don't thank us yet. Jim Garrett called out. Still got to survive Mary's cooking at the reception. The morning flew by in a whirlwind of preparation. The men worked on repairs while the women transformed Sarah's simple home into something festive. Wildflowers appeared in mason jars. Ribbons hung from rafters, and the smell of baking filled the air. Sarah found a moment to slip away, walking to the spot where she'd first found Jake bleeding on her porch. So much had changed since that night. She'd been dead inside, going through the motions of living. Now her heart beat with purpose again. Second thoughts. Jake found her there, dressed now in his best suit, borrowed from Morrison, but fitting well enough. Never, she touched the spot where his wound had been, just remembering. I was half dead that night, delirious from blood loss, but when I opened my eyes and saw you standing over me with that rifle, fierce as an avenging angel, I thought maybe I'd found heaven after all. Heaven? Sarah laughed. I tied you up and locked you in a barn. Best thing that ever happened to me. He grew serious. Sarah, I need you to know something. The life we're building, it won't always be easy. There'll be other challenges, other fights. The badge I wear now might bring danger to our door again. I know. She met his eyes steadily. But we'll face them together. No more running, no more hiding. Whatever comes, we stand and fight. Together. He agreed. The ceremony was simple, held in the parlor with friends packed in like sardines. Judge Roberts, who'd ridden in specially for the occasion, spoke words about love forged in adversity being the strongest kind. Sarah barely heard him, too lost in Jake's eyes to focus on anything else, when he pronounced them husband and wife, when Jake kissed her to the cheers of their neighbors. Sarah felt the last of her old life slip away. The widow McKenna was gone. In her place stood Sarah Sullivan, wife, partner, and woman unafraid of whatever the future held. The celebration lasted well into the evening. Tables groaned under the weight of food. Fiddle music filled the air, and even the most proper citizens of the county kicked up their heels in dancing. Jake spun Sarah around the cleared floor, both of them laughing at their clumsy steps. Where'd you learn to dance? She teased as he stepped on her foot for the third time. Same place I learned to be a husband, making it up as I go along. As the sun set, painting the desert in familiar shades of crimson and gold, Sarah and Jake slipped away from the party. They walked hand in hand to the rise behind the house, where they could see for miles in every direction. Look at that, Jake said softly. The desert stretched endlessly, harsh and beautiful, challenging and full of promise. Somewhere out there were more stories of loss and redemption, more fights for justice waiting to be fought. But here, now, there was peace. No regrets? Jake asked one more time. Sarah turned in his arms, seeing in his face all the tomorrows they would share. The ranch would prosper, the roses would grow. Maybe there would even be children, adopted perhaps, given a chance at a family as she and Jake had given each other a chance at love. Only one, she said. His brow furrowed. What's that? That it took so long to find you. He smiled, that rare, genuine smile she'd learned to treasure. Good thing I'm worth the wait. Jake Sullivan, you're still the most arrogant prisoner I ever had. Only prisoner you ever had, he corrected, pulling her close, and planning to stay that way. As stars emerged in the darkening sky, Sarah Sullivan, no longer widow, no longer alone, stood with her husband on the land they would tend together. The past was buried with its pain. The future beckoned with its possibilities. And in this moment, with the desert wind carrying the sound of celebration and the promise of rain, everything was perfect. Let's go home, Mrs. Sullivan, Jake said. I am home, Sarah replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Together they walked back toward the lights and laughter, toward the life they'd fought so hard to claim. Behind them, the desert settled into nighttime peace, keeping its secrets and blessing those brave enough to carve love from its unforgiving landscape. In the house that had known such sorrow, joy now reigned. And if Tom McKenna's spirit lingered anywhere in that wild country, surely he smiled to see his Sarah happy at last, loved by a man who'd proven worthy of her fierce heart. The story of the widow and the outlaw would be told around campfires for generations, a tale of justice served and love found in the most unlikely places. But for Sarah and Jake, it was simply the beginning of their greatest adventure, a life built together on the foundation of trust, courage, and the kind of love that only comes from looking into the darkness and choosing light. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. Where are you enjoying this tale from? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to connect with listeners from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Sarah and Jake's journey. Your comments and reactions mean everything to us.